Non-duality isn't intellectual. So it's often presented as intellectual because the means in which it's communicated is speaking. So people conclude naturally that it's an intellectual process or an intellectual understanding. And most people conclude and sort of give up on the search after they've got to a seeing of awareness. So their mind kind of splits and there's some part of their mind that sees awareness or sees consciousness, and then they think, okay, that's it. But that's still an intellectual understanding, and still it's an awakening, you could say, and it's really profound, but it's still part of the mind which is awakening. And non-duality isn't intellectual. It's not a mental process. You don't get this. And what happens in that is the person then thinks, okay, I don't get it. And therefore they put it into their schemas, so their thought processes. So if they've got a schema of, I'm always last, I never understand things, maybe they're like the youngest of the family, then they put that into their schema. So the fact that they can't understand non-duality becomes a failing on the person's part, and they think they're failing. Or they could have a schema of hopelessness, like I'm hopeless, life is hopeless, everything is hopeless, and then that gets turned into hopelessness. It could also be a relief for some people if you say feel very guilty about things, to realize that you aren't the controller of your life, you aren't the doer, can be a relief for you. And all of that fits into the personality structure and the mental dynamics of the person. But that's not non-duality. I used to do it. That's like the non-duality that you take and becomes yours. And that's not what non-duality is. Non-duality is the recognition and the energetic shift that who you are is this moment, is love. You could call it love. 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 That non-duality is this moment, and this is who you truly are. What most people think themselves to be is a character moving in time. So somebody with a history and somebody with a future, and somebody that's moving through time. But this character that you assume yourself to be is a happening in this moment, but it's not actually the experiencer. And that's really profound, that realization. And there can be the intellectual realization of it, and then the energetic experience of it, where all there is, where there's this energetic shift from being something to all there is this moment. That this is what you are. This is all that you are. This moment. So most people would assume that I'm speaking in this moment, but actually this is life speaking. This is this moment speaking, and it's love speaking. It's the same what's happening on your side. I'm not meaning to be like, consciousness speaks here. I'm just meaning that your words don't actually come from time. They come from this moment, and that's pretty obvious. They come from this moment. They come through a personality structure. So obviously I'm not suddenly communicating it in moon language and being woo, 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 woo. So, or a dog. I'm communicating it in English through a woman born in the 80s who's of this disposition. But that's not who's actually speaking now. Where is that person, all those things that I described? They're gone in the past. It's actually this moment which is speaking. And this moment is what's watching. So this moment is perceiving life. So again, we assume that me as a separate individual is perceiving my life. Boop, 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 boop. I'm perceiving my life. But who is this person perceiving? There is nobody perceiving. There is nothing perceiving. Nothing isn't the big black hole in the middle of the universe that sucks things in and then spits them out a very, 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 very long time later. That is not what nothing is. Nothing is this moment, because this moment, it gets even deeper and more profound. This moment is not a thing. You assume in your mind it's a thing. There's things making up this moment. But you also know through your scientific exploration as a child in the classroom that everything is made up of atoms. And if everything is made up of the atoms, it means that even though there is an appearance of things, there isn't actually things. There's an appearance of matter happening, but there isn't actually matter. And if you went any deeper into science, and I'm really not a scientist, so excuse me for my mistakes, but if you open up the atoms, then the particles get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they get to nothing. There could be something smaller again, like the Russian dolls. It could be something even smaller, but we can't perceive it with our microscopes. It could be something even smaller, but they've so far got to nothing that when you open up all the particles, there's nothing inside of them. So there is appearance of things. The atoms are lined up in certain ways. It gives the appearance of things happening. But actually, when you break it all down, there are no things. And if you go higher than atoms, you could say like the wood, no, okay, not the wood. The chair is made up from wood, and the wood is made up from like leaves and minerals and stuff from the ground. It was grown into a tree. It's made up from water, which comes from the sea. And this jumper is made up of like polyester and I don't know what else it's made up of. Plastic and cotton maybe. And then it's weaved into a jumper, but you can keep going back and back and back. So actually, like we say, okay, we're living in a house, but if you keep breaking it down, you get down to bricks, you get down to sand, you get down to water, you keep taking it back particles or atoms, then particles, and then finally it goes back to quarks, which have nothing inside of them. So in this moment, everything is appearing from not a place, not a thing. That's not something you'll ever find because it doesn't exist. So you can't ever be like, let me get out my what's that thing called? My eyeglass, magnifying glass, and look for nothing. If it's nothing, you're never going to find it because it's not a thing. So everything is appearing from no thing right now, not a thing. Which is really, really magical and mind-boggling and mind-exploding, and that everything is made from nothing and coming from nothing right now, and this is all that exists. And that's your experience. Your experience is that this doesn't come from a person. Your experience isn't that this doesn't come from time. Your experience is that there is nothing outside of this. Your experience, I think I got lost in my double negatives then. Your experience is that everything's appearing from no place. Everything's appearing from this moment. You are not watching. You are not experiencing. And there is nothing outside of what's happening now. That's your actual experience. But what happens is our mind comes in and tells us a story of something else that's happening. It tells us the story of the person, which is all fictional. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we function and survive as like community animals. That's one of our functioning techniques. But it's not the way things are. That's our biggest mistake as humans, is the belief that thoughts are the way things are. I am not human. I am not Lisa. The curtain isn't the curtain. It is when we communicate, but in the moment, actually, everything is mystery, is beyond concepts. It's here, alive, present. And this is freedom, this realization. But again, it's not a thought, because a thought is going in time, a story is going in time. And I'm not suggesting that you should use non-duality to psychologically relieve you from problems in your life. What non-duality does is it relieves you from seeking, and it relieves you from the identification with the person, which is freedom. But it doesn't relieve you from the conditions of the person and the karma of the person. It can do through time, after the realization of it, expand, and that can get looser and looser. But that's not the point of it. And I'm not suggesting that you in any way should use non-duality to fix marital problems or fix problems with your children. There are lots of wise people out there that give advice on how to communicate better and how to assert your needs in dealing with past traumas in time. And the person, the character, it seems so confusing because I'm talking about the disidentification with the character. We think of the character as like a soul or an entity inside of us. So if I'm saying that, when I'm saying there is no person, we think that then you've got to like walk around like some sort of empty robot that's like, meh, 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 meh. Life is love. There is nobody. I can't do the washing up because there's nobody. That's not what's being suggested. The character is integral to each body. So Khaleesi has a character and it's integral to her body. And her body is made up from genetics and conditions that have come from the past. So my personality is made up from everything that I've experienced to date and my genetics. And it's always changing, our character. It's always evolving with the environment, and it comes with the body. So when I'm speaking, a character comes about. So a character appears, and you guys all see it. But for me, it doesn't feel like a character is particularly speaking. It's like there's this emptiness, and then in that there's these sounds and like movements happening. But there is a character that's formed. Now, if I was going to communicate to you about my day, that also informs you of a character. And the way my character sees the day is from conditioning, is from what she watches and reads and how she interacts with people. And that arises with the body. So if someone said, "How are you, Lisa?" there would be a response that comes from the body. But then, and the body is seemingly affected through time, but actually the functioning of it, the appearance of it, is all happening in this moment. I know that seems really complex. So say if, like Khaleesi, or say use myself. So say something, I mean, I'm always using myself as example. I end up sounding like I've got a lot of issues. So let's use Khaleesi to get it off me for a bit. I've got no one else to use as an example. I can't use my partner. So we use Khaleesi. So with Khaleesi, she's a wild dog from Thailand, genetically wild as well as she grew up wild. And what I mean by genetically wild is that she's not a domesticated breed. Most of our dogs in Europe are domesticated breeds, and if they're not domesticated breeds, they're mixes of domesticated breeds. Whereas Khaleesi is not a domesticated breed, so she's not been selectively bred to be a pet. So she's a little different from dogs, domesticated dogs. And then she also grew up on the streets. And so she has very strong instinct to hunt. She has pointy ears, which means she's more interested in hunting than the floppy dog ears. The floppy-eared dogs. Floppy dog ears, if everyone knew what I meant. And she's got a strong predisposition to being possessive of everything that she owns or she believes she owns. She's always like reclaiming something as hers. And we call that character, but it's actually what it is in the body, it's responses, patterns responding in the moment. So it's her response, her usual bodily response that happens, and it creates the appearance of a character. So Khaleesi's character, I would be like, is like a very proud dog, very independent, very aloof, possessive, jealous, sweet, funny, loving. So these are qualities that I would describe as her character, but that's something that's appearing in the body. So it's being watched by something. It's not actually you. So this is what our characters are. And Khaleesi was also traumatized as a puppy by many things, being a street dog. And she carries that. So she's very afraid of random objects. So if there's like piles of rocks, she really is afraid of piles of rocks, of like rubbish, these types of things. So something most probably happened to her when she's younger. And this actually creates a characteristic as well. It's kind of funny, me and my partner laugh at it. It's maybe a bit mean that we're laughing at her trauma, but we laugh because we're like, I can see she's afraid of something. And I'm like, what the hell are you afraid of, Khaleesi? There's nothing. And then I suddenly see a big tree trunk or rocks or something or a bag. And so I go and touch it and she's like, okay, it's okay. And this creates character. The same for all of you. So say if you had parents, very detached parents growing up that weren't very supportive of you, maybe you developed a very detached personality to not be reliant on other people. And the way that you might frame that in a story about yourself is, I'm very independent and I'm very self-assured. I can do a lot of things by myself. I don't need to rely on other people. And that's your character. And there's nothing wrong with character. We all have character. And the problem that I have with non-duality is that most people try to deny character in some sort of way just because it's so hard to communicate about, I think. And maybe like I had in the beginning when I had awakening, that I was so obliterated that I didn't really know how to phrase it. And from listening to other teachers, there was misunderstanding in me intellectually, and I didn't deal with the character side of things. I didn't understand it. I had to work it out, and it led to mistakes, it led to downfalls, it led to being hurt, it led to me readjusting the way I saw things. And now I think it's really important to talk about this thing called character. So whatever traumas you've had, whatever past experience you had, whatever personality dysfunctions you have, don't have to go with awakening. What goes is the attachment to that. And then after the awakening, what can happen is these things can expand and change, just like everything. So when you've had the awakening, more than likely they'll expand and change and evolve, but it doesn't have to be. It could be that the rest of your life these same problems arise or these same dynamics arise, but maybe in a lighter variation, maybe easier to resolve, and maybe with more consciousness, but maybe not. And that's okay too. It's not that. When we're speaking about non-duality, you're speaking about this seeking dynamic, which is connected to the personality structure. So if you've got, like, say, a fear of dogs, maybe when you're identified with that, when you believe that's who you are and you really believe that you're going to die and the dog's going to kill you, then this becomes like really super intense. So say when you're playing your computer game, like I'm playing this little, like, I don't know what it is, a blob game at the moment. It's quite fun. But when I'm playing it, I get really involved in it. So like there was this one little worm that comes out and eats you, and it gives me such a shock every time. Like, I'm so into it, and then I'm like, whoa, like every time it comes out to eat me. And but there is some part of me that knows that that's not me. So the blob is like going around and then getting eaten by the worm, and even though it gives me a fright, so even though I'm involved in it, there's another part of me that knows that that's not me, and so it's not like terrified and like really overwhelmed by this worm and getting paranoia all the time that a worm is going to appear and eat me with big teeth that are like so that's the same for awakening, you could say, is that prior to awakening, you're really invested in the character, and everything that happens in the character's life is super important to you. And then this dynamic of seeking appears, which believes that happiness is found in pleasures and avoiding pain. And then this creates this like strong identification with the person. It's like it becomes so super important that you're like really like in the game. It's like I go inside the game and become this little blob. Whereas the awakening is like a detachment from that, seeing that the character isn't real, that what's happening to the character isn't real, that the doership isn't real, and that everything that you thought was you isn't actually you. It's an experience happening in you. But the character still plays the game and still has wants and desires, even though there's a removal from it. So it's still like if it's getting chased by a big dog, it's still running, screaming. It's not like sitting there meditating, being like, and if it has a trauma about people speaking to you in a certain way or belittling you, there will still be upsetness about it. What stops, what breaks, is this attachment to that's who you are, and then this seeking to only have people say nice things about you and not have people say bad things about you. The reason that I think it's important to distinguish that, which I do many times in my talks, is because I think it can create issues in the human psychology if you believe that you're going to become an enlightened person and somebody that is always peaceful and never has issues. I think that this is like not good. And then also if the person believes that it's not the doer, that can be relaxing for the person. I can understand that can take a great weight off the person. So it's okay to believe it to an extent to relieve the psychology. But if you really believe that you're not the doer, then I believe that problems can arise in your life, because the person has the appearance of doership. So it has the appearance of picking up the cup, of choosing between one thing and the other. But there's another knowing that's beyond the person, that there is no person choosing, there is nobody doing it, it's all happening. But the person has to act as if it has free will. I don't know how much of that makes sense. This is when I open it up to questions to see what makes sense to people and what doesn't.